Hello, everyone. Welcome to Life Edge, because life just should not be mediocre. I am joined today by our good friend and co-host. It's Dr. Susan Nash. How are you?
Good. And I'm so glad that we have Dr. Brian Matthews again, because he's been working on a really interesting new approach to motivation and leadership, and it will be great to hear him talk about it again.
Oh, and boy, we need new approaches to motivation and leadership with what's going on in this world. Oh boy, soon, any time. And in studio, we've got Harold Muliati running the video switcher mixer, and I'm Rick Zanotti. Here we go.
This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation, digital learning development, media development, corporate video, management consulting, and more. Visit us at www.relate.com. Thanks.
And we are back, and Susan, please do our honors for us.
Great. So we have Dr. Brian Matthews, our good friend and expert in motivation and management and leadership. He's a professor at Texas A&M Texarkana. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Susan and Rick and Harold. Always a pleasure to be a guest on the show.
Our pleasure.
Oh, it's great.
So
last time we were talking about a different theoretical perspective that you have developed, and it had a lot to do with the satisfaction in the workplace and motivation. Would you like to kind of fill in our listeners about what it was about and then describe it more in depth?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. And again, thank you so much for providing me with this platform to convey to not only you, but also the listeners this interesting concept in motivation. And I know the last time that we visited live, we were talking about different sources and different variables, whether it's intrinsic and extrinsic, in terms of motivation. So one of my research agendas and objectives was to look at in what ways motivation can be facilitated and transferred between different types of relationships. And so in one of the past live sessions that we had discussed different relational correlatives as it relates to readiness and satisfaction and performance and achievement. And so I wanted to dig a little bit deeper and delve, more theoretically into those different concepts. And so what I did is that I endeavored to overlap vetted and tested theoretical concepts as it relates to leadership and motivation and job satisfaction. So what I did is that I took Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Hershey and Blanchard's situational leadership theory, and Hertzberg's two-factor theory, overlaid those on top of each other to see exactly, what would be the actualization and manifestation of motivation as it relates to this transference and this facilitation of work and behavior as a derivative. And so, if I may, I want to break down the different relationships and then use motivation as a connector. So typically, what you have when employees are assigned, to different tasks, whether they be task-oriented or situational oriented, then one of the things that we leaders have to be mindful of is the readiness factor in terms of employees, and their readiness factor is either a psychological maturity or an aptitude maturity. And so with Hershey and Blanchard situational leadership theory, it actually dictates and it determines what type of leaders are appropriate and will make the most impact as far as performance is concerned. So you have 4 different types of leaders. You have a telling leader, you have a selling leader, you have a participating leader, and then you also have a delegating leader. So depending on the readiness level of your employees, that would dictate and determine and engender what type of leader you need to be to those particular groups of people. So with that in mind, you may have an employee that is more ready than another employee. So where I may be more of a delegating leader to one, I may be more of a telling or a selling leader to another employee. So again, their readiness level will determine and dictate what type of leader I am. Interestingly enough, I know traditionally, whenever we've looked at leadership, the leader pretty much determines what the employee does. But in terms of Hershey's and Blanchard's situational leadership theory, the employee, based on their competency level and their echelon of psychological maturity, they actually have the ability to reject our leadership style. For example, if Rick is an individual that has a high aptitude, he's proficient, he's productive, which means that he is efficient and he's effective. He knows his job. He's very versed and extremely educated. He's prudent. He's what is called autodidactic, which means that he's a self-learner. He's proactive, etc. Then he really doesn't need me to tell him what to do. He really doesn't need for me to micromanage. He really doesn't need for me to require for me to establish very stringent parameters. So he actually has the propensity to reject my leadership style if I'm trying to tell him exactly what to do. So one of the things I need to do to adapt as a leader is, once I ascertain his level of psychological maturity and his aptitude proficiency, then I'm actually able to delegate and entrust in him that whatever assignment I give to him, he's going to perform with excellence. And that continues to establish and facilitate a level of trust there. So as it relates to readiness, and again, more theoretically, and we'll touch base a little bit more superficially before we connect motivation. The former research that myself and my colleagues did, we looked at 3 different types of relationships. So we looked at readiness and satisfaction, then we looked at satisfaction and performance, and then we looked at performance and achievement. So whenever you amalgamate those 3, then you have this byproduct, which is the more ready an individual is, the more satisfied they're going to be. The more satisfied they are, the better they're going to perform. The better they perform, the more they achieve. So that's how those relational dynamics connected. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to augment that, and we wanted to add to that motivation. How was motivation transferred, or it is admitted into this unidirectional relational manifestation as it relates to readiness and its effect ultimately on performance? So whenever we connected motivation in with all 3 of those relationship dyads, there is a concept that is called the motivation to transfer learning. And what that means is, if I'm an employee, and whether it's through some type of instructional mechanism by which I am taught a problem-solving solution, or I have a hands-on approach in developing a resolution for a problem, I then become a vessel of the knowledge that I obtained. So therefore, I acquire experience. So now what happens is that I can take that experience, and there is a transfer in, there's a transfer through, and there's a transfer out, and then there are what are called transfer gains. And basically what that means is the knowledge that I have acquired through the experience, now I become motivated to utilize and apply and employ that knowledge that I've learned. So now I can transfer that same knowledge into a brand new situation. Then that knowledge through implementation is transferred through this process of problem solving. And then you also have there's a transfer in, transfer out, there's a transfer through. Then as I'm transferring through simultaneously, I'm still learning. So then at the very end of the process, there are transfer gains. Basically, a transfer gains is an increase in learning. So now I have become more proficient because of the augmentation of the knowledge that is added to the knowledge that I brought into the situation. Now I'm able to take that elevated acquired knowledge and then use it in a new situation. So every situation that I enter into, I bring into it an added level of knowledge. And then because I learned and acquired that knowledge, then I'm motivated then to then exercise what I've learned. So that theory, in a nutshell, is referred to as, and my colleagues and I, we deemed it as the relational learning continuum theory.
Wow, that's amazing. So here's an application question. So here in Oklahoma, Oklahoma City area to be specific, UPS is having all kinds of problems keeping their employees, and they're kind of doing a bad job. For example, I had a picnic table that was supposed to be, a small picnic table. It was supposed to be delivered, and they said, okay, we delivered it at your front porch, no picnic table. And so I looked, and it was like delivered in Purcell. Purcell, that's 20 miles south of here. So I talked to the driver. I called and did all sorts of things. And anyway, the driver goes, when she came back around, she goes, oh my gosh, well, my truck is right next to the truck that goes to Purcell. They probably loaded it on the wrong truck. Anyway, she said, we have so much turnover and everybody is just chaotic. So like, what would you do if you were hired to straighten out UPS's warehouse in Oklahoma City?
That's a very interesting question. One of the things I would do is that I would assess their level of knowledge. And if there is training that is necessitated based on these errors, and let me interject this notion that mistakes are valuable opportunities to amass learning. And so oftentimes mistakes are necessary, or mistakes are prerequisites for learning to take place. Because if you have a driver that is never made acutely aware that mistakes are being made, then the inference is going to be that what I'm doing must be the right thing to do, when in all actuality it's not. So any levels of potentialities will not be exposed, would not be discovered, would not be pursued, because errors, whether they be marginal or whether they be drastic errors, are not brought to the attention of the individual that commits the infraction. So what I would do is that I would provide a level of training, for that employee, for those employees that may be making those common errors, and then either teach them how to engage, or teach them how to implement package delivery effectively, but then also give them an opportunity to use their imagination and brainstorm and provide input as to how they would solve the problems. Because once they have more of a hands-on approach to solve problems, then they become more empowered because they've invested into the decision-making process and the problem-solving process as well. And so now what manifests is this package of knowledge that they can then take, and then they can utilize it whenever they're in that same situation or a brand new situation. And so that would be my response, to an occurrence such as that.
So you wouldn't punish the person for depriving the customer of a picnic table that she really wanted?
It would just depend on what knowledge was known at the time. If it was an intentional infraction or an intentional mistake, that would be different. If it was a mistake that was unintentionally made, then I would actually address that situation, but then provide some guidance and provide some consultation to mitigate or to eliminate the infraction from happening again.
Now, see, Brian's being very nice. I think we should draw and quarter the guy who deprived you of all that pleasure with your thing. And then, no, I would have a different approach.
What was funny is I was going over to get my mail, and the UPS truck came by, and he goes, this is about 5 days later, like, beep, beep, beep. And I looked around, and the driver waved at me. She goes, hi. And she goes, I've got your picnic table, got your picnic table.
It took 5 days?
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
anyway, they found it. It turned up.
Now you know what? Okay, if I was working in that situation, I would try to figure out how can we fix this technically. Obviously, they have a turnover issue, so that's a whole other set of problems, and they've got to figure out why are they turning over so much. What's going? Usually, UPS doesn't have a lot of turnover, so it's sort of odd. But it could be our situation now with COVID or whatever else.
Well,
But you know what?
I couldn't tell if it's turnover or if they're expanding and hiring a lot of people
Oh, maybe,
because
maybe.
there's
Well,
so much more demand.
But I would look at it from a tech point of view. When you scan it, if it goes in the wrong truck, it should beep you. And
Good idea.
because you've got barcodes, you've got probably RF IDs, you've got other things they could do. I bet you they could do a quick software thing. As you put it in, it goes,
I think it should just beep.
and then you go to
It
your
should shock the person.
yeah.
It shouldn't just beep. If they put this in the wrong truck, it should shock them.
Just some mild shock stimulation, yeah. But no, something to get their attention, and definitely like, oh right, this is going to the wrong truck, because a lot of times, UPS, I know what they do. They rush. They're really in a hurry, because they get paid by delivery. Now FedEx doesn't have that issue. They get paid by the day. They work fast, but they don't have to rush that delivery schedule. It's a little bit different. So they're always rushing, and rushing is going to cause what? Mistakes. That's one of the biggest problems. They're always in a hurry to get out that, load the truck as fast as you can and get out. So the quality control process at UPS is probably not the best out there when they're rushing to get out, because they're thinking, okay, I got to make my money. I got to make my box deliveries. How do I do that and still try to be? And a lot of them, what they do is they'll come back, 2 hours later. Oh, hold on, I'll come back. And they go back and pick it up, and if they can. So it's sort of interesting. What they did with you was what they usually do. They try to switch it to another truck that's nearby, but it still took you 5 days to get it. That's a long time. So obviously there's something going on in the system that's not working, and there's something going on with management that isn't working. Like Brian said, you've got to kind of go back and figure out what's going on. Are we communicating? Are we not communicating? Does this individual have a lot of problems? All of that has to account for some, because they get calls a lot with people complaining. I know we've called, other people call. It's like, this is supposed to be delivered today. I'll give you an example. This is interesting. HSN likes to do work with Andrew Lessman, who makes vitamins, which are really good, ProCaps. We've been buying them for years. It is really hard to get a shipment show up at your place nowadays. It winds up in the wrong state, in the wrong city. And now the post office won't communicate with UPS to tell you where it is, because they do transfer between. So I think what Brian was talking about is a good general, let's try to get to the root of the problem. But the problem, it sounds like it could be a deep one. And Brian, how would you deal with the fact that a problem like that may not just be a couple people, but it could be a systemic or endemic problem?
I think the answer lies in the culture of the organization. If it is a learning organization, are mistakes readily and aptly addressed?
Mm-hmm.
And if there are not, why are those mistakes not being addressed?
Yeah,
because
that's a good point.
there is a mentality, and more so a perception or a viewpoint, which is called a overconfidence bias. And that means that I have this grandiose or this superlative viewpoint and vantage point and deductive resolve of my competency. Therefore, I proceed and I practice or perform whatever the task is, not realizing that mistakes are being made. And so I enter into a situation so overconfident that what transpires and then what resonates are different errors. So that means that because of my overconfidence, and there are no interventions to expose or to unveil those deficiencies, I'm going to continue to have customers like Dr. Nash that receive picnic tables 5 days beyond the expected date. And typically what you hear even when you are, let's just say that Dr. Nash called UPS and she wanted to complain about her delivery. One of the automated messages before she's connected to a customer service representative is typically this call is being monitored for what? Training purposes. And so what those recordings do in a compilation is that it provides those individuals that participate in training an opportunity to hear real life conversations taking place, expert responses, or unprofessional responses. It gives those individuals an opportunity to say, okay, based on what the customer service rep said to Dr. Nash, did she respond the correct way? Do you think that she answered all of her questions effectively? What else could have been done? And so if I'm an employee in a training session, now I've been exposed to different scenarios that I can now implement in the event that I encounter situations such as that. So then when I come out of that training, now I can take the information that I've learned, because now I've been experienced to a degree. I'm still novel because my experience hasn't strengthened, because the situation hasn't presented itself for me to exercise what I've been taught. But now I can take what I've learned in that training session and now implement that and exercise that in a more effective manner. So I can transfer what has been instilled in me. I can take that and transfer that out into a situation. And then through that situation, I'm learning. So now there are increases, or there's gains, or there's a profit or a surplus in learning. So now I can take what I've learned from another phone call and apply that to the next one, and apply that to the next one, and then apply that to the next one. So then my responses are more intuitive,
So, but here's the situation. Okay, so that's a good idea if there are any phone calls. But there weren't any phone calls because there's no way to, they just said, go use the interface on the computer, don't call, and the computer said call. So I just got back with this seller on Amazon, and then they were going to send me another one, but they put in a claim. So, and then I talked to the person, the driver herself. But, okay, so my question is, since, like thinking about Rick's idea that maybe there's a sensor and it buzzes whenever you put it on the wrong truck, what's wrong with like having it shock you if you do the wrong, put it on the wrong truck?
Well, when people play games,
it's
look
a
at
mild shock. The second time, it's a little bit stronger.
And what's funny? That would probably work in a behavioral psychologist kind of format. But, if you play games, you're constantly getting feedback from, I guess, the controllers where they beep and they buzz you. So it's the same idea. You could do something like that just to get their attention. So it's like, whoa, hello, what you doing?
Well, do you remember the Stanford experiment, the Milgram and the Stanford, where they kept like telling him to do things and they give them stronger and stronger shocks, but they were actually faking that they weren't really being shocked.
Right.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was pretty telling. So, and they wound up, wanting to kill the people that weren't obeying afterwards. It was like, geez, that was a very good experiment. A little scary, but going back, what Brian mentioned in the beginning about, what Brian.
Just question though, Brian.
Yeah.
Why does that not work? I mean, I know it's against the law, but besides that, why?
I think there are different interventions. The UPS as well as other businesses, can put in place to ensure that less mistakes are made. Obviously, you're still dealing with the human element. So because there is a human integration and incorporation in any processes, it is susceptible and vulnerable to mistakes. But I think there are some interventions based on learning patterns, patternistic event forward, where you can serve to reduce, the occurrence of deficiencies and mistakes. So, a situation like yours doesn't happen again. It's very funny that you talk about your product not being delivered for 5 days. I had actually went to McDonald's last week actually, and thought that I was very clear in announcing what my order was and what sauces I wanted. And when I get to the window, the lady gives me my food, and I actually leave and get home only to realize that it was the wrong order. And so, what do you do whenever you continue to have infractions, such as that? Is it more of an acuity and more of a vigilant approach that the individual needs to take, or what training could be implemented or could be created to prevent, wrong orders from being handed to customers? Because obviously, if my order is wrong, then that means that Rick's order is going to be wrong. So then, Susan, by the time you get to the window, if I'm, one of the employees, I'm having to ask you, okay, well, ma'am, what exactly did you order? Did you order this? And you can say, well, no, I didn't order that. I ordered this. And so then it's going to be revealed, I must have gave your order to someone else. So again, so I think that's one of the reasons why you have companies that they continue to provide on-the-job training, and they send employees to conferences, and they have other training opportunities to allow their employees to be more exposed and to become recipients of information. Therefore, they're more knowledgeable, and then they're more effective practitioners and experts whenever new situations occur.
Now, Brian, at least you were lucky you got the wrong order. You could have gotten Susan's table by mistake from McDonald's. Then you're in trouble.
Yeah, they would have told me, sir, if you can please pull up, and then can you pop your trunk? And I'm
That's
like,
right.
oh my trunk, I'm just going to put this picnic table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good luck getting that through the window.
Yeah.
She was able to. She picked up the box, and I was going,
Yeah.
"Well, okay, it's not so heavy." And I tried to pick it up. Like, oh. The next time I saw her, I said, "Wow, I'm impressed."
That's funny. Now, Brian, when in the beginning you were talking about the leadership continuum, or, one of the things that companies I think have done wrong forever is they promote people real quickly into leadership who've never done anything like that, and they don't give them training, and they expect them to be leaders or managers. And when I was listening to what you were saying, when you use me as an example of, here, this is a person who does this, and you basically, you're self-motivated, you get your job done, and that's what every manager is looking for, somebody who doesn't need to be managed. They love that. Wouldn't that be, what was the old saying, management would be great if it weren't for the people? But, if you look at management, every manager wants somebody who's self-trained. They can do everything, and you just go, can you do this? And you turn around and it's done. But that doesn't happen in reality all the time. And in the management continuum, per se, what is the ideal of, you have a new manager or a manager, how do you train that manager? What's the approach using the leadership standard you've worked on, and what's the approach of training a new manager to become that self-working, responsible manager who can handle it well, but who also knows how to transmit that same knowledge to the people under him or her?
Placing that individual in situations where the lack of competency is exposed. I had wrote a variation of this particular article for the local paper here, the Texarkana Gazette, and one of the analogies that I use is that if a coach never put all of his players in the game, those players that typically ride the bench beyond the starting five, those players will never increase in competency.
Right.
They will never increase in confidence. Why? Because you always play your starting five from quarter 1 to quarter 4. And so those individuals that may not be as skilled as your point guard, your 2 forwards, or your 2 guards, your 2 forwards in your center, they're never going to get better because you never put them in the game that will allow their current knowledge base to be tested, to be vetted, to be stretched, to be strained. So there is no learning. So if I'm dribbling the same way all the time, and I'm never put in the game to see that I probably need to dribble another way, then no learning takes place. So I think putting managers in positions where they have to make decisions, where there are unstructured problems and unstructured solutions, everything is not familiar. There's no there's no commonality there. There's no intermarrying of principle and situation. So I'm literally in a situation where my current knowledge is native. It's foreign. I'm sorry, it's not native, but it's foreign. It's very peculiar to this particular situation, and so it puts me in a situation where I have to evaluate, I have to examine, I have to scrutinize, and I have to determine what are going to be the best approaches and methodologies to solving this problem. Only then can I learn what my deficiencies are exposed.
So in other words, give them a chance to get the experience, make mistakes, maybe even fail, but learn from it.
Absolutely. And I think you said it operatively, giving them the opportunity to do one, make mistakes, and then also to learn from it.
Yeah.
Because if I'm teaching a course, and Dr. Nash can attest to this, if I'm teaching a course, but there are never any negative student evaluations, and I'm going to always be of the mindset that I'm a great teacher. No one ever says anything bad about me. So I'm going to continue to teach the class the same way every semester. And there's going to be this linear implementation of quality and integrity as far as the course design, course delivery, etc. But if no student ever says, you know what, Dr. Matthews, he's a great teacher, but his verbiage is too high, then I'm never going to know, you know what, it's probably a deficiency of mine that now that it's been brought to my attention, let me learn from that. Not reject the constructive criticism and then lower my verbiage so that way what I'm conveying is understandable. Because you may have students that never acknowledge that they have no clue what I'm talking about. And I sound good in the classroom, but they still went 16 minutes and they didn't learn anything. So I think actually putting individuals in situations where their knowledge has no effect to a degree, it allows them an opportunity to bridge that gap with knowledge that they learn. And then when learning takes place, then that's when experience happens. And so experience is not only the best teacher, but it's also the best motivator.
That's good. Yeah, I like the sport example too, the team example, because that makes sense. If they never get a chance, they never get better.
Right.
Right. And the other thing too is, in the case of a class, I mean, it's kind of sad if that all comes out at the very end. I mean, I think to me the main thing is to try to kind of rattle the cage enough to get people to let you know early, within the first couple of weeks, that there's some kind of thing that's not working right. Like usually it's communication. Something needs to be clearer, or they can't get a certain resource. And I think that applies to the workplace as well. Right,
I agree. There is a concept that is called, and Dr. Nash, you may be familiar with this, but it's management by walking. And so if I'm a manager that is steadily combing the environment to evaluate what's being done, the quality by which work is being performed or the task is being performed, then I'm able to respond in a just-in-time manner to mitigate any further difficulties, mitigate any complexities, or to reduce any problems that may be perpetuated because there's no evaluation, there's no response to behavior. So I may be a professor, for example, that's teaching ineffectively, but if no one ever evaluates my performance, then again, I'm going to assume that I'm doing an excellent job. No one ever says anything. No one has no constructive insight to provide. So then that's when this overconfidence bias resonates. And even though it may be unintentional, it's still virtual, it's still practical, it's still realistic. So I may be making mistakes, and because no one ever intervenes, then I'm going to continue to make those same mistakes with confidence. So, so again, I think an evaluation of performance, an appraisal of performance, weighting performance is very valuable for leaders as it relates to employees. So that way I can deviate from being more of a micromanager and a hands-on leader to now being able to delegate responsibility because now I know that this individual has acquired knowledge and they're proactive in acquiring knowledge as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. And so many managers never leave their offices. When you talk about the walking manager who goes out, and I know a lot of managers. I've been in a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and the management team never leaves their management area. So as a result, they have no idea what's going on in the company. All they know is what they're told by their group of almost peers, and they don't know what's going on. So when they start venturing forth into the company, depending what kind of company it is, they're shocked. My God, is this what's happening here? It's been happening for years. I didn't know. They have no idea. They don't get out there. So therefore, they think they're doing a great job, and they think the company may be doing great because sales are good, but it may be the company's doing a disaster and costs are bad because they're not looking at it. They're not getting out there, especially when you were talking earlier about motivation. How do they know the employees are motivated? It could be a lot. It could be statistical, but it could also be an emotional thing within the company that people hate the company or they don't like what the company does or whatever. But nobody knows in management because they don't ask. They don't even pay attention. They don't notice. And it's interesting. It's sort of like you've seen this before. A lot of people go to a restaurant. They have no idea who served them, who they were. They're just shadow people. They're not people. They're just people that are ignored completely. There was another word for it I read once. I can't remember what it was now. But they were just like ghost people versus going to a restaurant and engaging people and talking to them, getting to know them, having a better restaurant experience. And before you know it, they treat you very nicely because you cared about them. And it's the same in work and business and education, wherever you are. If you treat someone nicely or you pay attention to them, for example, you as a professor, or both of you are professors, if you talk to the students as if they're real, not just people with their mouths open and you're feeding them, the response will be a lot better. They'll be more interested in what you're saying. They'll want to talk to you more. You'll get the people that come after class and go, "Hey, professor, that was really interesting. How would I handle this?" And now you've got that engagement and real learning going on. What do you think about that?
Well, it's similar to to myself and Dr. Nash. Let's just say that we have been exposed to training as professors, and we went through all of the technological training, and we went through all of the tutorials that the university provides. But we're never given an opportunity to step outside of a classroom. We're never assigned any classes if you're an adjunct professor to teach. So now what happens is that I have all of this knowledge that has been transferred in, that has been acquired, but there are no situations for me to transfer this knowledge into and out to. And so now I become frustrated because, going back to the sports analogy, the coach is not putting me in the game. So I've been practicing, I've been showing up on time, I've been participating in my drills, and not only have I been participating in my drills at practice, but I have practiced outside of the practice setting, but I haven't been given an opportunity to play the game. So now I'm frustrated, or because my knowledge level has not increased to the degree that I can solve a very difficult and arduous problem. Now the challenge becomes disheartening for me because accomplishing or solving the problem is more of a challenge than I expected. So now what happens, because there is a discrepancy between my knowledge level and the ability to solve the problem, then I become discouraged. So now what I would to do is revert back to a level by which my knowledge is compatible. Or if I have amassed a great deal of knowledge, but then the task or the situation is underqualified for my knowledge base, then there's no challenge there. And so that's what makes it difficult for leaders is that, managers, you have to find that delicate balance, because if the problem is too difficult, then it can discourage. But if it's too easy, it can also discourage.
Yep.
Well, so here's another thought. Okay, I like your idea of like management by walking or walking around. Okay, but now how do we do it? In Zoom? I mean,
Right.
Well, hopefully this is not the new normal. Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah, this would not make a good new
that.
normal.
Everybody's saying that, wow, this is so much better. This is going to happen anyway. Now, I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people are saying that at least a lot of remote work, a lot of distributed work will replace being in the office all the time. So that becomes a big challenge. How do you walk around in Zoom?
You don't. Not easily.
And I would suspect that there would have to be some deliverables, timelines that are set, schedules that are adhered to, maybe logging in, providing updates. So there is some type of a structured paradigm by which managers can gauge the performance and the quality of the performance of their employees. Now that the environment has now changed and it has transitioned to more of a convening virtually than a convening physically.
I have another fear.
So it turns into transactional
Yeah.
leadership and not transformational.
But
transformational is challenging.
But what will probably happen, Susan, is that they'll instill a new method. You have to have webcams all over your house watching you all day long. Therefore, they can have a better sense of what you're doing. That is what I could see some idiot coming up with and saying, this is what we need to do to fix a Zoom issue. Oh, gosh, I can see it. Where's George Orwell when you need him? I don't know. So... it could get scary. Well, we are out of time, as always. That was good. That was a lot of fun, and I think some good food for thought there on just a lot of different ideas of managing and how to manage and how to get feedback. I'm really enjoying that team analogy a lot. I might steal that one from you. It's a really good team analogy of people getting better. You don't get better if you don't get a chance to play. That's so true and so simple. That it's just a good one. So we appreciate you coming on again as always, Brian. We wish you the best in the coming, I guess, semester or quarter, and see what happens with education as we're going. And I hope this all gets resolved soon, and we can all get back to either classrooms or whatever we do, because we are social creatures, and without that social aspect, even Zoom isn't going to replace the social aspect completely. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I guess we all stay tuned. Susan, any close?
We need the tailgating and football stadiums.
Yeah, that's true. But with 16 feet between us, that would be important, though.
Well, I don't really go to the games, but
I don't either.
but people enjoy them.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Thank you much, Brian, for coming on again and sharing with us. Always appreciate it. If you're watching the show, we have information on how to get a hold of Brian below, and do check out Texas A&M. They really are a great school system. I'm impressed from everybody we've met from there, and the curriculums they have and everything. It's really pretty good. Great system.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much again, Rick and Dr. Nash and Harold, for having me on the show. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure's ours. And again, if you have any questions, please leave comments below, or we'll put some info on how you can get a hold of Dr. Matthews and contact him. And Susan, we'll see you next week. And for all those watching, thanks a lot. We'll see you soon. Have a good one. Take care. Thanks.
Great show.